Imagine a world where, you know, deep-seated rivalries in the Middle East just started shifting secretly,
Right, replaced by these really unlikely partnerships all happening behind closed doors.
driven by shared threats, clandestine meetings, not your usual public diplomacy.
Exactly. A story with unexpected twists, hidden motives, characters you wouldn't expect, all paving the way for something huge.
And that's what we're getting into today. This deep dive looks at that really complex, often secret path towards normalization between Israel and some Arab states, especially those key years just before the Abraham Accords.
Yeah, we've gone through quite a stack of sources here, some really close-up accounts from people who were right in the middle of it. It gives you this sort of secret history view of a major geopolitical shift.
So our mission for you listening in is to pull out the key takeaways. We want to give you a shortcut, really, to understanding the why behind it, all the motivations, the roadblocks, those pivotal moments, so you can get up to speed quickly on something that's, well, still shaping the world. Let's unpack it.
Okay, so let's dive right in. To really grasp how these alliances started, we need to talk about something that sounds almost like a movie plot. The April 2018 heist. Israel grabbing Iran's nuclear archive.
Right, that Mossad operation.
From your reading, what made that specific event such a big deal, more than just, a daring spy mission? Why did it change the game regionally?
That's a key question, because it wasn't just about the intelligence gain, though that was significant. It fundamentally changed how key Gulf leaders perceived Israel.
How so?
Well, for years, Israel was mainly seen through the prism of the Palestinian conflict, a regional problem, sometimes an outcast, this heist. It showed Israel as this incredibly effective security provider, someone who could actually hit their shared enemy, Iran, hard.
So it flipped the script completely. Israel went from being maybe a liability to a potential strategic asset, someone they could actually maybe work with openly down the line.
That's a huge shift in perception. And the sources really stress how much impact it had, specifically on MBS in Saudi Arabia and MBZ in the UAE.
Yeah.
There's this quote from a senior Israeli official saying, basically, MBS and MBZ were so impressed it made them feel Israel was making them more secure. And that directly increased their readiness to think about normalization. That really hits home the impact, doesn't it?
Absolutely. That feeling of shared threat and Israel's capability, it became a real cornerstone. But, okay, if that was the case, why didn't things just, click into place immediately? What were the hurdles still there, especially the Palestinian question?
Well, almost right away, you had the Trump administration pushing its deal of the century.
Right, that ambitious Israeli-Palestinian peace plan, Kushner, Greenblatt doing the rounds in the region.
And the Gulf states like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, they were interested in better ties with Israel, for sure. But they were still saying publicly, we need progress for the Palestinians. That was the official line.
Still holding that line, yeah.
But the big sticking point, as the sources show, was that the Palestinians themselves just flat out rejected the Trump plan.
Yeah, DOA. Dead on arrival.
Jason Greenblatt summed it up, didn't he? He said the Arab states didn't want to be held back, but they also didn't want to ditch the Palestinian cause entirely. They weren't quite ready.
So they were caught, a real bind. How long could the Palestinian issue basically act as a veto on everything else? And while the public statements were cautious, behind the scenes, things were definitely heating up, driven by people like Yossi Cohen, the Mossad chief back then.
Definitely. Cohen was constantly in secret contact with Gulf leaders. The sources talk about this really important meeting in Aqaba, Jordan. Spy chiefs all together.
Yeah.
Cohen from Israel, Humaydin from Saudi Arabia, chiefs from Egypt, Jordan.
And crucially, Major General Majid Farah, the Palestinian intelligence head.
Right. And what was the key message delivered there? What's the takeaway?
The really startling thing was the direct warning to Farah. Essentially, the Gulf states are thinking seriously about normalizing with Israel without you.
Wow. That's blunt.
Incredibly blunt. A direct shot across the bow, trying to pressure the Palestinian leadership.
And to really drive it home, the very next day, Netanyahu himself flies to Amman, repeats the same message directly to King Abdullah of Jordan, which is huge, given Jordan's history with the West Bank and its Palestinian population. Shows how serious they were.
It really does. And it wasn't just talk. Later reports surfaced. Netanyahu and Cohen apparently met MBZ in the UAE sometime in 2018. That just underlined Israel's growing feeling that, a breakthrough, especially with the UAE, was looking more and more possible.
Okay, so the momentum's building. These secret channels are buzzing, groundwork being laid. But just as things seem to be moving forward, did something happen to potentially throw a huge wrench in the works.
Oh, absolutely. Just as these behind-the-scenes efforts were really gaining steam, something happened that shocked the world and threatened to unravel everything. The murder of Jamal Khashoggi in October 2018.
Right, that sent shockwaves everywhere.
And it immediately put the brakes on these delicate discussions.
And wasn't there an Israeli connection that surfaced, complicating things even more?
Yes, that was another layer. The embarrassing revelation, or allegation really, that Saudi agents might have used Pegasus spyware on Khashoggi's contacts, including his fiancée. And Pegasus comes from NSO Group, an Israeli company, though NSO denied involvement in this specific case.
And our sources suggest providing tools like Pegasus was sometimes seen as a sort of sweetener for building ties.
That's what's indicated. So after the murder, Saudi Arabia's Pegasus license got suspended. But here's the really telling part. Netanyahu and Cohen stepped in. They actively worked to stop the Khashoggi fallout from completely derailing their strategic goals with Saudi Arabia.
So they intervened.
Yes. The view was that MBS was a vital strategic ally, and Israel's long-term national interest outweighed the controversy around the Crown Prince's actions, however tempestuous, as one source put it.
That's a pretty stark calculation of national interest over other concerns.
It absolutely is. Real politic in action.
And some of the Saudi figures reportedly involved in the Khashoggi affair were also key players in the outreach to Israel.
Exactly. That's another fascinating, if grim, detail. Saud al-Qahtani, the alleged point man for Pegasus and accused of overseeing torture, and General Ahmad al-Asiri, the alleged mastermind of the operation, had apparently made several secret trips to Israel for security talks.
Wow.
Now, legally, al-Asiri was later acquitted and al-Qahtani was investigated but not charged, citing insufficient evidence. But their reported dual roles just show the complex, sometimes morally murky reality of how these ties were being built.
So despite the Khashoggi crisis, the push didn't stop. And it actually became quite public just weeks later.
That's right. Cohen and Netanyahu made that very public visit to Oman to see Sultan Qaboos.
First public visit by an Israeli leader in, 22 years?
Something like that. And they flew over Saudi airspace to get there. Unheard of at the time.
A huge signal.
A massive symbolic gesture to the whole region. There was apparently a slight hiccup.
Oh.
Sarah Netanyahu insisted on going, which was apparently an embarrassing breach of Omani protocol since the Sultan was unmarried. But they smoothed it over.
Okay. And Netanyahu used the visit to say publicly, don't underestimate the openness, the thirst in the Arab world today for Israel.
He was putting it out there. And the sources suggest if Sultan Qaboos hadn't been ill, he passed away in early 2020, Oman might have gone for full normalization.
Interesting. His successor chose neutrality instead, but kept unofficial ties going.
Right. And this Oman visit wasn't isolated. Just days later, you had Miri Regev, an Israeli minister, making a very visible visit to the Grand Mosque in Abu Dhabi.
I remember seeing photos of that.
And then that really emotional moment when the Israeli anthem, Harikva, played in Abu Dhabi after an Israeli judoka won gold. These were powerful public signals, even without formal relations yet.
So, okay, despite maybe some hesitation, especially from the Saudis publicly?
Right. Warm privately, cooler publicly.
It seems the shared fear of Iran was just this incredibly powerful glue, wasn't it?
Right.
Really melting decades of ice.
Absolutely. That common threat was central, and it really crystallized at that U.S.-sponsored summit in Warsaw, February 2019.
The one billed as being about peace and security in the Middle East?
Officially, yes, but everyone knew the real focus was Iran. Confronting Iran.
And the guest list was telling.
Very telling. You had senior people from Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, Qatar, Egypt, Jordan, Morocco, plus Netanyahu for Israel and Mike Pence for the U.S.
Pence talked about a new era, didn't he? An Israeli PM and Gulf Arabs breaking bread together.
He did, and Netanyahu's team put out that tweet, quickly deleted, mind you, but it bluntly said the meeting was about advancing the common interest of war with Iran.
Not
subtle at all. And then there was that other leak, the YouTube video from a closed session.
Right, with the Bahraini foreign minister.
Khalid bin Ahmed Al Khalifa, stating flat out that dealing with Iran was a far greater challenge than the Palestinian issue. That really showed where priorities were shifting for some.
A clear glimpse into that mindset. Though there was still some caution, right? The group photo.
Yeah. They carefully placed Netanyahu between Pompeo and Pence, so Arab leaders didn't have to stand right next to him in the main shot. Optics still mattered.
And you also had Prince Turki Al Faisal, the former Saudi intelligence chief, giving an interview there saying, hold on, for Saudi Arabia, the Palestinian issue has to be fixed before normalization.
Exactly. So still a balancing act, mixed signals publicly, especially from the Saudis.
But if the Saudis were still hesitant in public, the UAE seemed less so.
Definitely less so. In late March 2019, their foreign minister, Anwar Gargash, made that pretty remarkable statement.
The one about the old Arab decision not to have contact with Israel being a very, very wrong decision looking back.
That's the one. Coming from a senior UAE official, that was huge. And it really reflected the thinking of MBZ Mohammed bin Zayed,
The de facto ruler. Tell us more about his role in this. What was driving his calculus?
Well, MBZ is seen as the central architect of modern UAE strategy, British military trained, very focused, and his worldview, according to the sources, is shaped by two major perceived threats: Iran and the Muslim Brotherhood.
Okay.
He saw Israel as a vital counterweight to Iran, an ally against political Islam, and importantly, a source for cutting-edge security tech.
And beyond security.
He also had this economic vision, moving the UAE beyond oil into technology, services, innovation, a vision that really clicked with Israeli leaders who saw huge potential for partnership there.
And his relationship with MBS, the Saudi crown prince.
Fascinating dynamic. MBZ is older, seen as a sort of mentor figure to MBS, despite MBS being technically higher ranking now. They shared strategic thinking, wanted to reshape the region, fought common enemies like the Houthis, pushed back against Qatar and the Muslim Brotherhood, supported Sisi in Egypt.
Both described as these sort of socially liberal autocrats.
Pretty much. And both seeing Iran as the #1 strategic threat, just like Israel did.
But even with MBZ driving this, the UAE probably wouldn't move without Saudi Arabia's, given Saudi Arabia's size and influence.
That's the assessment. Saudi Arabia's oil wealth, its sheer economic and geopolitical weight, its role as guardian of Mecca and Medina. It holds immense sway. So when Gargash made those public comments, it was almost certainly with at least tacit Saudi approval. They might not have been ready to say it themselves, but they let the UAE test the waters.
And behind the scenes, the signal was even clearer.
Apparently so. The UAE ambassador in Washington, Yusuf Al-Otaiba, privately told Jared Kushner that the UAE was ready for normalization.
Okay, so the UAE is ready. Saudi Arabia seems implicitly okay with it. It feels like all the pieces are falling into place for a public announcement.
It seemed that way.
But then another hurdle, this time from Israel itself.
Yeah, just as the Gulf side seemed aligned, Israeli politics got very messy.
The government collapse. Elections.
Yeah, exactly. Netanyahu's coalition fell apart. They had inconclusive elections. He was leading a caretaker government. It just wasn't a stable time for the UAE to make such a huge move. They didn't want to look like they were interfering in Israeli elections.
Plus, Netanyahu was talking about West Bank annexation again, to rally his base.
Right, which made it even harder for the Emiratis publicly to move forward at that exact moment.
So the timing was off. But the Trump team still pushed forward with part of their plan.
They did. They unveiled the economic part of the deal of the century in June 2019 at that conference in Manama, Bahrain.
The $50 billion plan for the Palestinian economy, financed by the Gulf.
That's the one, which, again, the Palestinians immediately dismissed as DOA.
But the key thing about Manama wasn't the plan itself, was it? It was more about who was hosting and what they signaled.
Exactly. Bahrain stepping up was significant. It's a small kingdom, very close to Saudi Arabia, hosts the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet. Security is paramount for them. A deal with Israel offered another layer of security, and later Israel actually placed a military liaison at Fifth Fleet HQ, part of a regional early warning system using Israeli tech.
So Bahrain saw real strategic value. And their foreign minister, Al-Khalifa, was incredibly outspoken there, wasn't he? Giving interviews to Israeli journalists.
He really was. That was quite something. Israeli media were allowed in, even though Israel wasn't officially represented.
And what did he say? What were the key messages?
He was remarkably direct. He backed Israel's right to defend itself against Iranian targets in Syria. He said Israel was here to stay. And crucially, he strongly hinted normalization could happen without waiting for an Israeli-Palestinian agreement.
Really separating the issues.
Yes, and he framed the conflict as territorial, not religious. He said trying to make it Jewish-Muslim was going back to ancient times and declared, "We want to live today." Very powerful framing.
And there was that symbolic moment, too, the prayer in the old synagogue.
Right. Israeli journalists and Jewish-American delegates praying together in the disused Manama synagogue, presented as, an example of the future we can build together.
So Manama was another clear signal. All these pieces, the secret talks, the public gestures, the shifting priorities, It was all building.
It really was, setting the stage for perhaps the most explicit public signal yet.
Which came just a couple of weeks later, July 1st, 2019. Yossi Cohen, the Mossad chief, gives a public speech. Highly unusual.
Very unusual for a sitting Mossad director. At the Herzliya conference, the atmosphere was apparently electric.
And he started by celebrating the Iran archive heist again.
He did, announcing the Israel Security Prize for the team. 2 women, 4 men. Names kept secret, of course. And he used it to say, look, the impossible is possible. The unbelievable can happen. Setting a tone.
And then the big reveal.
The big reveal. He announced publicly that Israel, after a long, secret process by the Mossad, had established formal ties with Oman.
Now, it was just a representative office, not full embassies.
Correct. Not full diplomatic relations yet, but it was the first official confirmation of Mossad's direct role in building ties with Gulf states. A huge admission.
And a clear sign that Oman was just the beginning.
That was the implication. He spoke about this rare opportunity, maybe the first in Middle East history, for a regional understanding leading to broader peace.
And he listed the reasons. Shared threats, U.S. ties.
Shared interests, yeah. Iran, jihadist terrorism, close ties with the U.S. administration, even good communication channels with the Kremlin, all converging.
Looking back, his speech seems incredibly prescient. He basically laid out the roadmap for the Abraham Accords.
He really did. Even though some people were still skeptical then, thinking the Gulf wouldn't move without the Palestinians, Cohen clearly saw the writing on the wall. He knew the Gulf leaders were ready. The only real obstacle, in his view, was Israel's own political mess slowing things down.
And it's important you noted that while the Gulf ties made headlines, a lot of his speech was still focused squarely on Iran.
Absolutely. Iran's nuclear program, its regional aggression, its presence in Syria, that remained the core concern. He even hinted at Mossad's ongoing operations against Iran, preparing for potentially spectacular attacks on their nuclear program and people involved. That underlying Iran focus was the constant thread.
What an incredible story. This deep dive really shows how these intense, often secret diplomatic efforts, driven by those shared threats, especially Iran,
and shifting priorities,
really did pave the way for a seismic shift in the Middle East.
It's truly remarkable, the move from decades of Arab-Israeli conflict being the defining feature to some key Arab nations finding common ground, even alliance, with Israel. It reshaped the map.
So what does this all mean for you listening? Well, it underlines that the Middle East isn't static. It's constantly evolving. Security needs, economic goals, new leadership. These things can and do reshape long-standing dynamics, even if old grievances linger.
Right. It gives you crucial context for understanding regional stability, the power plays, and, the ongoing search for peace today.
So here's something to think about after this deep dive. When you consider all these factors, the security fears, the economic dreams, the weight of history, what do you see as the most lasting lesson from this secret history?
And maybe more importantly, how might these alliances forged in secrecy and shared threats continue to change the Middle East in ways we haven't